All right, the recording has started, and this is the February 15th, 2021 Crossplane community meeting. We are heading into the 1.1 release in a couple weeks here. I think we're entering a feature freeze this week. We'll talk a little bit more about the timing. But so yeah, we're heading towards a upcoming release soon. So let's go ahead and I don't know if the project board view is going to be super useful for this conversation here, but maybe we can just do some overall status stuff on the general areas down here like we normally do. I think that'll probably be the best way to spend our time here.
Sounds good.
Yep. All right, so let's go ahead and get us started. Dan, you've been focusing on a lot of security enhancements and such. Fill us in on what you've been up to and what's going to be shipping in 1.1.
For sure. So the main updates to security, and this is really, I guess, adding new functionality rather than, boosting some sort of security aspect of our code base. But the new functionality basically allows you to provide credentials to providers in a more secure manner. And so the main ways we've enabled that is added new secret sources that are used by default. So any provider could support any authentication source they'd like, but we'd like to give tooling to make that really easy. So by default now, all consumers of Crossplane runtime will get things like environment variable file system, and then also Kubernetes secrets, which have been supported out of the box. So we now have a guide in the docs, and we did a TBS episode on this last week of using the Vault sidecar injector to put credentials into the file system. This can be a much more powerful credential supplying method, and it also has secrets engines for the different cloud providers if that's the type of provider you're using. We don't go into a lot of depth into that in this guide. This will just show you basically how to store things in Vault and have them sync to the file system of your provider. But you can also do like temporary service count generation and auto rotation with like the GCP backend or AWS or Azure backend. So it's small change in the providers, but enables a lot of different functionality. And the only other really change in Crossplane for that was that we now support setting the annotations and labels on the pod for the provider. Previously, we allowed on the deployment and service count, but the controller config basically has a spec.metadata section now, which enables things like sidecar injectors. So that's pretty much all the changes, but they're all in and documented at this point.
Nice, with like user guides and stuff too to be successful in trying it out themselves. Nice, very cool. What was that, Dan? There was some user guide that I was asking about just on Friday. What you said it was coming? Oh, it was Kellen, I think, for the bidirectional patching. Was it?
Yep, and it doesn't look like Kellen's on the call today, but I know Kellen mentioned that he was working on that and was hoping to have it in the next couple of days. Maybe we'll talk about this a little bit with the release schedule part down at the bottom. That's the kind of change that could come in this week.
Yes.
And so we'll talk about, that kind of thing. And then there's also, I want to call out one other thing that you had asked for, Jared, was a guide around kind of like supporting multi-tenant scenarios, which some other folks have also shown interest in now. So I'm working on getting that together as well this week.
Awesome. Yeah, that was definitely a guide I was excited about, so that everyone doesn't have to come to Dan to get the personal one-on-one support for that one. The guide will be really, really useful. Yeah, I've heard a couple of folks asking about that. It seems to be a pretty common scenario and setup for people to run their clusters. Muaf, I'm going to add you as an editor right now. I said this every week. I'm just going to do it right now. Let's see, where is Maurice? Boop. Editor. Hey, feel free to accept your changes liberally, Muafik. You have been trusted. All right, let's go ahead and get an update on provider acceleration as well too. I know there's a lot more coverage across providers in this release here that's going to be pretty exciting. I think and Casey is not on the call, is he? So Muaf, if you want to get us all updated on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can give you an update about the AWS stuff. So now we have so there are a few things that needs to be written like manually, like late initialize, which did not, like ACK didn't have support. So we have a PR now that has a support. So it's generated automatically, and also is up to date, almost completed. There are a few quirks there that I'm trying to figure out. And also the reference field generation is also in PR stage. So like, with all these getting in, I think like, we will have less and less custom code that is required to be written manually. And like, right now, after these steps, there's this external name annotation that we might be able to somehow let the developer choose a field for that property to be used. That will also eliminate a lot of hooks that you need to, take care of in your custom code. So these are like ACK side. And we have new managed resource API, Secrets Manager has landed, thanks to Benedict. Its PRs merged today, and it's not ACK generated, so that's what I'm trying to figure. But what I've tried to figure out today, like how to convert it to generated one. There are a few things that we need to add to code generator, but yeah, it'll be in the next release.
Awesome. And then in terms of Casey's work, to do provider acceleration with doing some code generation and wrapping around Terraform. We did see a very cool demo from him that he showed us on Friday for some of the vSphere, VMware vSphere stuff that he had generated. So he had types for like tags and categories and VMs and all sorts of cool stuff like that, so that he was able to show some controllers running and reconciling that using the vSphere client and setup that he was using there. So that was super cool. I just didn't really know about that demo. I don't know if there's more details about the work there, Phil, that you might be on top of.
Yeah, so we kind of did a sync up with Elad from CDKs and stuff on the multi-language support, and kind of looking at two approaches. So one is kind of like a code first approach, like Cube Builder and that kind of a thing, where you kind of create your structs and then kind of go from there. But in terms of the amount of tooling that's required to really get to multi-language, there's just kind of gaps there in terms of providing a good experience around that. So kind of landed on, having an XRD YAML first type of an experience, and then being able to generate, CRDs from that, and then import those into, your packages and stuff, and then use those from within the kind of running, CDKs, composites behind the Kubernetes API line there. And so, Elad has a prototype CDKs operator. And so, you basically need to accept, the input, XR schema. And so, there'd be like tooling that would generate that, and then ideally generate a scaffold around all the methods that you would need to implement. So then at that point, you could just say, here's the definition of my XRD, whether that be done, in CDKs, like we've shown, with the Crossplane CDKs project, which is in Crossplane contrib right now, or just manually authoring, your XRD YAML. Then running it through a command, and then that would basically generate, an operator that would be like fill in the blanks kind of method experience. And so we'd have to look at like round tripping support and stuff like that. But in general, it feels like that could work fairly well for whatever target language you want. Yeah, it's still kind of in idea phase. So we're kind of sitting on the API design number 2. Elad's provided feedback on that PR in the Crossplane CDK repo. Yeah, and if other people have questions or comments, would be happy to engage with you, kind of either in GitHub there or on Crossplane Slack. And we'll probably have a little bit more time to focus on this after 1.1. And so it's still kind of in its current state with Crossplane CDKs for the 1.1 release.
Nice, Phil. Thank you very much. So then composition, I think that we had some of the bigger announcements. Am I off? You're saying something?
Yeah, I can give an update about this.
Oh yeah, sure. Go for it.
Yeah, so there are like a few PRs that have landed, like kind of bigger PRs. One is that like a lot of users from community asked is that connection secrets published by the composite now you would be able to choose a field from composite resource to be included. And with the bidirectional patching we have, for example, you can say, hey, like take the IP address from status of this resource and patch it to status of composite resource. And then in the connection secret, you can use that IP address so that you're not anymore like, tied to what provider managed resource implementation gives you in the connection secret. You can choose any, fields in your composition to be present in your final connection secret that is going to be used by the apps. So that's kind of cool. And also we have Nick updated the composition introduction, which is like, in a much better place now. So yeah, I think there were a few like, smaller PRs as well. And some bigger ones like bidirectional patching, we have talked about it, last community meeting. So like overall, we have pretty big features in composition for 1.1 without breaking any APIs.
Yeah, and I'm definitely interested for any other potential like user guide updates, or like we were already talking about that Kellen is hopefully putting together for the bidirectional patching. So I think that's one thing that I haven't always kept up with all the feature updates or additions to composition as a whole. And so as a composition author, having it very easy to understand what are the features that I can use, like what are the capabilities, and have it be very like centralized and in a easily referenceable list sort of thing. So I understand like what can I do with composition when I'm building one out. Because like sometimes when I'm reading like a long guide, or if I'm looking at like a large example and like there's like a comment of explaining like a type of transform or something like that, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like I now know that I can do that because I scanned the entire thing and got into the depths of it. But maybe some like summary of here's all the capabilities that you have with composition could be helpful if we wanted to flesh that out more.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can have like more examples, maybe like simpler examples to show us some of the new features that would also help. And additionally, Nick also opened a PR about like required patch policy, so you can mark a patch that like as required, so that if it cannot fetch the value from composed resource for some reason, it will not go on with the execution. We had this problem with one of the composition where you take the namespace of the claim that the user has created, and for example, you can choose a provider config or some other resource with that name, or like using the namespace of the claim basically. But this didn't reliably work because patch might start before the claim ref namespace is populated. So this will enable us like hey, if namespace is not there, wait before rendering the resources. So that's also like small but pretty useful feature.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's becoming quite it was already quite useful, and now like these extra additional features to it, like filling out and fleshing out more scenarios. Discoverability for those scenarios is definitely important as well too. Cool. Phil, you already were talking about multi-language support, right? You already got into that.
Yeah, it looks like I actually skipped ahead on that. So.
Kind of hopped ahead there. Okay, got it. Yeah, that's why I was listening to you, and I was like, wait, hold on, where are we in the doc? Okay, that's it on there. And webhook support for providers. Is that Muaf? Is that you?
Yeah. So for a long time, like a lot of users in the community have asked for webhooks for like validation and stuff, and we have like other use cases such as immutable fields and other like UX improvements, and we finally decided that we want to invest in that area. So I will be working on a one-pager for webhook support this week, and hopefully like in I think Crossplane 1.2 we will have like webhooks for especially the API changes that might be breaking, so that we are more free to bump the versions from V1 beta 1 to V1 or V1 beta 2 or so. So yeah.
Is that related to crisscross at all, or is that just kind of another Like, is that webhooks for like migration purposes or for like functionality
Um,
implementation plugins?
Yeah, this is more about like, managed resource functionality. For example, like, CRD scheme allows us for such things like, for example, field validation, enums, and all that stuff with Kube Builder, but we're not able to implement our own custom validations. For example, right now in composition, when you fill out the base, if you make a typo, it is accepted until like, you try to render it and resource cannot be created. So with the webhook support, we are able to prevent such things when you like, create the composition resource. So likely like one of the biggest composition webhook implemented will be to validate the bases in composition so that you don't make those typos.
Oh, got it. Okay, I see. I see what you're talking about now. There, where
Yeah.
webhooks really come in handy now is like validation stuff. Got it. Yeah, that any like, and that definitely helps improve the authoring experience. Like when you're building your compositions and then having less to debug and like navigate through the system when something doesn't work. That's awesome. Nice. All right, Dan, you got a couple things you added here as well too.
Yeah, as part of, I was on duty last week, and one of the tasks that we've had kind of like floating around for a while, and then now that on duty has started, we bumped it into that queue, was rate limiting and back off for controllers. So right now in all the different providers, we basically have like a short and long wait. And if we have an error that's not due to talking to the API server, then we basically use the short wait, and otherwise we use the long wait. So that's kind of how we have that, every minute reconciliation when things are healthy. Or we have like every 30 seconds. These are configurable, but those are the defaults for, requeuing on an error, like, an error from the AWS API or something like that. So we'd like to have some sort of exponential backoff there, which controller runtime actually implements a default controller rate limiter that's described in this document that Jared has up here.
That some smart person wrote up.
Well, I don't know. I didn't write the code. I just interpreted it. So, but this kind of describes what's going on there. And one of the main issues that we've had with this is we hit errors like pretty frequently in our different reconcilers. And we want to be able to requeue faster. And the back off pretty quickly for the default implementation is going to go up to like 16 minutes. That's the max delay. I think it's 1640 or something like that, which is not what we want for the type of errors that we see in Crossplane. But it would make sense, right, if you continuously like can't hit the API server, because that's something we're expected to do every time. And so basically the default doesn't make sense for us, which is why we've used these hard-coded but overridable values. And so the idea here is we want to make this configurable for consumers, and also use some sane back off for, the defaults for providers. So basically what this is proposing is here in each controller, we have a token bucket rate limiter, which basically says you have a max burst value for the number of requeues you could do at one time for all items reconciled by a controller. So if you have 10,000 RDS instances, for instance, the default burst here is 100 for the token bucket rate limiter, which means that controller can only requeue 100 times before it's going to start backing off that value and delaying those requeues longer. And then for each item, it just has a basic exponential back off, and that's what goes up to the 16 minutes. One of the things that we've talked about, which is in the issue, or maybe the PR that's linked in the agenda today, is doing, instead of a token bucket rate limiter for each controller, doing an overall provider token bucket rate limiter, which basically means that we can make guarantees like we will only hit the AWS API at a maximum of like 10 times per second or once per second or something like that across all controllers. And so we could pass that down into there. So you can kind of see some of the conversations that's happening here. This PR is actually pretty small. It's basically just returning errors instead of returning requeue afters. But we want to also have a default that's good for most providers to use. So anyway, something to keep in mind, should be a better experience with like having resources reconcile faster when they run into issues, as well as potentially not, like rate limiting the Azure API, which I think we saw, or if a controller is behaving poorly or something like that, guarding against those cases. So hopefully we can get that in. This is kind of decoupled from the Crossplane release, right? Because it's in Crossplane runtime and only relates to the different providers. So we'll see about that. But hopefully we'll be in the next round of provider releases.
Very cool, Dan. It seems like a really nice write-up here as well too. I can only imagine that by the end of typing this up here, that your hands were warmed up again after your run. What do you use for your blog, hosting or theme or styling or whatever?
I just use Hugo with GitHub Pages, and I don't know what theme this is. I've had the same one for like 5 or 6 years now.
Oh, interesting. Are these just code blocks here? Like, backtick, backtick?
Yeah, exactly. Which is actually very annoying. If it's a code block and a link, you can't really, it bolds it, but you can't really tell the difference too much. But
interesting. Cool. Yeah, very cool. Very cool write-up here. All right, and then cluster API integration, there was some interesting stuff, including the live stream last week and some updates.
Yeah, so this wasn't on the agenda, I guess, for or not the agenda, the board for stuff to do this release necessarily, and it's not necessarily really coupled to this release either. But it's something that's just kind of come out of necessity with the place that the cluster API project is at. So watching the live stream and maybe reading some of those issues will probably give you more context. I'm not going to go through all here, but essentially there are specific concrete types in cluster API for each provider, and then kind of abstract types at the core cluster API level. And those, through a reconciliation process of the two separate controllers, kind of get bound together to result in provisioning a Kubernetes cluster. Those different providers are basically kind of like Crossplane providers, but extremely scoped and like touch a lot of different APIs in the same reconcile and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, so it can be like kind of difficult to maintain those, and they really don't want to duplicate the work that we've already done. Most of the cluster API folks are just interested in being able to build a Kubernetes cluster, right? So they have more expertise on the control plane side of that. So what we'd like to do is switch out some of those concrete resources with Crossplane XRDs that represent kind of like their concrete implementation. So they have like a GCP cluster type that provisions like a network, subnetwork, firewall, etc. And you can kind of imagine how we could abstract that with composition. So we'd like to start plugging those in instead of having them have to maintain providers that do that, since we kind of already have all the granular resources as well.
Awesome, Dan. Very cool. Yeah, I'm really excited about that initiative as well too. It's just because of the, or not just because, but one of the reasons is because of the upstream impact that it has in like the awareness and adoption and such of Crossplane into the upstream Kubernetes community. So making headway there with that type of folk and the contributors to Kubernetes, et cetera, is really, really cool.
Yeah, I have a question on the cluster API. So I know that Crossplane providers are already allowed to provision clusters in some of the clouds like AKS, EKS, and GCP. So do you expect also some convergence at the level of the actual definition of the cluster resource object itself? Or right now is more about this lower level resources in the infrastructure that you expect to be somehow imported in the cluster API?
Yeah, so I'd say generally more in the latter of those two camps. But primarily right now, we're trying to just replace the providers with the Crossplane providers. So essentially, you can do everything that you do with Cluster API, but just installing Cluster API and just installing Crossplane. And so that's the goal for the time being. We also did a demo back at the Crossplane Community Day with the Equinix Metal folks, where we kind of shoehorned Cluster API into a Crossplane provider as well. And so you could imagine that the XRDs that we're defining to replace the Cluster API providers could go along with a Cluster API Crossplane provider, and they could be connected in that way into a higher level composition with, like cross-resource references and that sort of thing. But that's really far down the line. One thing I will say is, the Kubernetes community is very large, and there's a lot of different folks, and even within just Cluster API, there's a lot of different companies and organizations that have different things they'd like to do with the project. So by nature of that, the cycles for getting things implemented or changed or updated are pretty long. So we kind of are going with the approach of bite off a little bit. Let's show that to folks, kind of see if they can, buy into the mission of this direction, and then continue to iterate from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and looking at the like the Kappa code and stuff as well, just like all the little bits and bobs that they're adding in, having like a cross-plane composition with the resources that we have, just seems like it's such a perfect fit for the extensibility story there. So yeah, super excited about this. This is awesome.
Yeah. Vince from over at Cluster API, who's one of the maintainers, was mentioning, that folks basically when they are doing all of that in a single controller, there's no way to like customize different values. So they'll like randomly have to add like, all right, we need to add a number of subnets field to the AWS, cluster type or whatever. Whereas with an XRD, someone can just fork that and literally add a new field that maps to a new subnet, and I was kind of explaining that, in that you not only could do everything the Cluster API providers do, but you could also make it much easier for people to essentially have their own Cluster API providers, just, forks of those, and distribution with packages and everything. But, we don't want to give them too much at once.
Yeah, it's going to be super awesome. Thanks for leading that up.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't want to give them too much at once.
Well, they don't want to take too much at once.
Yeah, they can only ingest so much.
Yeah.
That's funny. Cool. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
This is also like, if we get that in, likely Crossplane will be used in Kubernetes testing stuff, right? Because Cluster API is used there.
Yeah, I thought about adding a section here. Maybe I'll drop something in Slack. There's a Crossplane demo that we're giving on Wednesday for Working Group Kate's Infra, which is the team that maintains all of the Kubernetes test infrastructure, so like the GKE clusters and that sort of thing. If you ever interacted with Prowl, that's where that runs, etc. They use Terraform and Bash to kind of manage that right now, but it requires merging PRs and then a privileged Google admin going in and executing from their local machine commands, which is not a fun
their
story.
Local machine.
Yeah. So I mean, they're calling the GSP API right from their local machine, so they execute Bash scripts, etc., from their local.
Wow.
So that's not a way to do anything, right? And so with Crossplane being in the CNCF, and especially with it moving towards incubation, there's a lot of interest in integrating there. And so we'll be giving a demo of what that could look like. So there's the idea of like managing the test infra, and then with Cluster API, it would actually be running Crossplane also in the test infra, right? If we got to that point where there was a lot of Cluster API adoption of Crossplane. So kind of two facets.
Very, very cool. Cool. All right. So all those awesome features and initiatives that are in the 1.1 release, the release itself is coming up in 2 weeks from now. So today we will cut the 1.1 release branch. And then for this week is feature freeze, where we're not expecting any more features to be landing and coming in. We're going to be doing some bake time, settling things down a bit. And so no more features this week because it's feature freeze. And then, wait, does that mean no more features this week, or this is the last week for features?
It means no more features. Friday, I guess, was technically the last day, although some things that were approved merged today.
Got it. Cool. Okay, so no more features with lots of complexity or changes coming in now. But docs changes, user guide changes, bug fixes, etc., are totally on the table. And we can start stabilizing and polishing any rough edges. to get us to the finish line. And then next week is code freeze, where we wouldn't want to be taking any more code changes at all. And it's but user guides and docs and stuff like that. We'll be testing, we'll be updating the guides and all that sort of stuff is the plan for next week. But yeah, but the 1.1 release branch happens today. So anything that goes in, should follow the backport cherry pick process that we normally follow to get things into the 1.1 branch. And yep, and then March 2nd, we plan to do the release. So that's awesome. Really excited to get the 1.1 out. First release after the major 1.0 before the holidays. Okay, and so Dan, you did 2 live streams yesterday that we all got to witness, last week, 2 live streams last week that we all got to witness and experience. You also did one with Vault.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this a little bit. We basically just went through that guide earlier. Very nice of Nick Jackson from HashiCorp to come by and help us out in the chat and stuff while I made some errors in configuration and that sort of thing. So that's a fun one to rewatch. And Nick also mentioned that he'd like to come on for a future show. So
that'd be cool. Nice. Yeah, that was a fun one too. With the live debugging and the chat was active as well too. That was super fun. Yes, and I am one of our most faithful listeners, Dan. That is true. Don't forget it. I schedule my holidays around TBS episodes.
I'm very sorry that you're like.
All right. So yes, so next thing, CNCF Incubation proposal. So I've been putting that together over the last week plus or so. The big thing that we're putting together is getting adopters of Crossplane together. So one of the biggest important things there is that that to be included in the public proposal, we need to have consent from folks that are using Crossplane. So to be able to use their name or their company name, logo, etc., we have to have consent from them. So I put together a survey and sent that out to folks that I know are using Crossplane and getting some responses back on that one. We tweeted about it and put it on Slack as well too, but we should send that out again, or just get this to people that we know are using Crossplane, or try to get as many of these use cases and adopters documented as we possibly can, because that's the biggest hurdle for incubation, to be accepted to incubation by far. So we'll need to keep following up on that and getting as many people to respond as we can. I may be reaching out to some of you all if I know you have a good relationship with somebody that I haven't gotten a response from, see if we can kind of team up and get connected with them and get some of the data. But feel free to share this link here liberally though, with anyone or any channels you want to. It's not just people we know are using Crossplane. Anybody who's wants to participate in that survey is more than welcome to. All right, and so there's an announcement last week as well too that the next Crossplane Community Day will be hosted by the CNCF itself as part of KubeCon EU. It'll be a 0-day event there, which would be really cool to be kind of part of the KubeCon atmosphere, etc. This is hopefully the last KubeCon that will be virtual, and the one after that, which I believe is scheduled for Los Angeles, just up the road from me here. So not super exciting for me, but maybe exciting for you guys. But yeah, hopefully we'll get to be in person for that one. But this one on May 4th, we'll have our next Crossplane Community Day there. So we will have a call for proposals out. Phil, do you know when that's our CFP for Crossplane Community Day is going to be put out, or what the timeline for that is?
Yeah, I got to sync with Terry on that, but I'd imagine it'd be shortly here. So
okay, cool. Yeah, we'll make some noise about that too, and get some of the some speakers. Just like we had an amazing speaker lineup at our the Community Day just before the holidays. So that was really, really awesome. Hopefully to get some of those speakers back and get some first-time speakers to an opportunity as well too. But yeah, so that'll be part of KubeCon on May 4th, and look out for the call for proposals, call for papers, the CFP coming up soon. We had talked about the community on duty rotation a little bit because we had instituted that. I think everybody's gotten a chance to be on duty by now, right? Is there like, we don't have to talk about it for too much because we kind of talked about it last time, but are there any high level lessons or experiences that are worth sharing from some of the people that have been on duty so far?
I feel like that it's gone fairly well. I think that in general, we've already been pretty responsive in Slack, and that's been a positive of our community. But I think we've done a better job of like distributing who's responding to responding to different folks who come along. So I think that's been a big positive. For sure. One of the things I definitely want to reiterate is there's a lot of folks in Slack who are answering questions and really steering people the right direction, who are not specific maintainers of Crossplane. And this role is totally open to everyone. So if you're interested in doing that, you don't have to sign up to do a whole week all day, which is kind of like the current schedule. But if you're just interested in kind of having a little more formal of a role, lots of you are already doing that. So would love to have more folks join the program.
Right on. Sounds great. Okay. So then the last item I had here is on Docker Hub and their rate limiting, throttling stuff, and how we had applied as an open source project, which we are. They took a long time to get back about our application, and they said that they would be reviewing it a couple weeks ago, and they hadn't. So I pinged them just this morning. At the end of last week, was it? For an update on it. And so just this morning, I did get a response saying that because the project is backed by commercial entities, that we are not eligible to be an open source project on Docker Hub. That seems like a fairly narrow viewpoint they're taking, and I'm gonna, I don't know if they have an appeal process or, but I'm going to push back on it a bit here. But if that's their stance, moving to an alternative registry source makes a lot of sense to me. The Rook project has started seeing rate limiting where people cannot always download or pull an image, and that's not acceptable. So I think we should be making moves to, or making plans to move to an alternative registry source soon.
Are they saying that Upbound is a commercial entity, or the CNCF is, or what?
They didn't say who, but I would imagine Upbound is probably where they were looking at. If it was for CNCF projects in general, that would, because that is a nonprofit, right? Or isn't it?
Right.
So yeah, so I don't know exactly. It was a form response or an automated response. It was not specific with details about us at all. So I will push back and try to get more details or see what's going on there. But I don't think they're the direction that they seem to be heading with this policy in the first place. And then, open source projects, like they belong to a foundation, like all this stuff, and then like not letting them, like this is clearly going in a poor direction. So yeah. So I don't know about this.
I mean, for a project to be in the CNCF, right? It is owned by the org. Right?
Yeah,
that's kind of like the point of it. Yeah, so it's not.
The foundation owns the IP, owns the trademark, all of that. So
interesting.
Yeah, Docker Hub is not on an upward trajectory, I don't think. Let's just say that. Okay, cool. So that's I think that's everything we had on the. Just add this to the notes. Were there any other agenda items that folks wanted to bring up, PRs or anything like that? Okay, cool. Well, if there are no more, I can not do two things at once.
There's one thing I wanted to mention.
Go for it.
If anyone wants to check out our talk at the Utah Kubernetes meetup, that's going to be tomorrow. So you can Google for that, and that's all virtual. So yeah, definitely check it out.
Utah Kubernetes?
Utah Kubernetes meetup.
That sounds fun. Do you have a link to put in the agenda?
Yeah, I'll grab it and throw it.
Yeah,
out.
throw that in the old agenda there, buddy. We should tweet about it too. That sounds fun. Are you giving the talk, Phil?
Yep, giving a talk, and then Dan might join as well, so should be fun.
Nice. Where is it in Utah? Who's sponsoring or hosting it?
So Ryan was doing it. Let me see. Here's the link. Let's drop that in the doc here, I guess. Community topics. I'll just put it after the.
Cool. That sounds really fun. Cool. Well, good luck with that, Phil. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Okay, then I don't think there are any other topics here, so then we can go ahead and adjourn, and I'll see you guys on Slack.
Awesome. Happy Monday. See you guys.
Have a great week, everybody. See ya.
Bye. Happy Monday.